Today is 28th August 2025, and this is the first of perhaps 2 or 3 videos that I'm doing from a place called Dandi, which is in the Navsari district. This is south of Ahmedabad, considerably south, 240 some miles south of Ahmedabad, in the state of Gujarat, in western India. Now, Dandi is really a kind of a hamlet. It's a very small village, and astonishingly, it is now a part of the world's imagination of what radical, non-violent social movement and transformation might look like. So this is a village that was entirely unknown until such time as Gandhi arrived here in April of 1930, more precisely on the evening of April 5th, 1930, after he had commenced a march that began in Ahmedabad in March of 1930, on 12th March 1930. So this is then the first of a couple of videos on the Salt March, as it's often known, or the Dandi March, and the Salt March itself is part of what is called the Salt Satyagraha. And in this video, I'm going to very briefly describe what the Salt Satyagraha was about, the events leading to it, and then we're going to move to the National Salt Memorial, Salt Satyagraha Memorial, which was inaugurated a few years ago, and it's in the vicinity, just few hundred meters away from the site where I'm standing presently. The site where I'm standing presently is called the Prarthna Mandir. Prarthna is the word for prayer. And this is, Mandir is literally a temple, but in this case, the word temple has to be interpreted more loosely, more casually. It's a place for literally for prayer, in the sense that that Gandhi often used that word. So, for example, he used to have what are known as prayer, prayer meetings. In fact, in the last, let's say, year of his life, in particular, last 18 months, this became a very common practice in Gandhi's life. But this is something that he had been pursuing and practicing, in fact, for decades. And during the course of the Dandi March, every evening would actually conclude with a kind of a prayer meeting, a kind of a discourse, where Gandhi would then speak to the villagers. So let's go back first to the rudiments of the story of Dandi. So the story essentially is as follows. In the other video, I'm going to give a longer account of the background. Here, I simply want to talk about the events immediately preceding the march. Now, in early 1930, there had been, so in fact, there had been a resolution in late 1929. It's called the Purna Swaraj resolution, which was passed at the annual meeting of the Indian National Congress, known as the Congress for short. And Purna Swaraj means complete independence. So this is the first time that the Congress officially declared that its objective was the achievement of complete independence or self-determination for the people of India. Liberation, that is, from the yoke of colonial rule, right? And in fact, what is today celebrated in India as Republic Day, the origins of this go back to the unfurling of the flag and a resolute dedication to the idea on 26 January 1930 of the commitment of the Congress and the people of India to the achievement of self-determination. Now, the Congress had essentially authorized Gandhi to think about a way in which a new phase of this struggle for self-determination could take place. And it's in that context that we have to think of the salt satyagraha, because let us recall that in the preceding years, Gandhi had been largely committed to what is known as a constructive program. And there was even an impression that some people had that the objective of political liberation of India had now receded into the background. This had always been, of course, on Gandhi's mind. And so Gandhi now thought of a way in which he could animate the masses, galvanize the masses, right? And he struck upon this idea of breaking the salt law. Right? Now, it's impossible at this juncture to get into a detailed history of how the British came to acquire a monopoly on the production, distribution, and sale of salt, and the long history of the kind of revenues that they earned from salt. Salt is, of course, an essential commodity, especially in a tropical country where the risk of dehydration is much greater. And this salt tax was in fact an onerous imposition on the people of India. Right? Just how onerous has been described in hundreds of books, and we need not get into it, but the tax was a very substantial levy, and this is on an essential item which no one can do without. And that is one reason why Gandhi picked on something as simple as salt. It is, of course, the genius of Mohandas Gandhi that only he could think of something like salt and say that I'm going to now wage a campaign against the salt law. And so what he does is he writes a letter to the Viceroy of India. All right, this letter, if I recall, is written on March 1st or 2nd, something like that. It's actually published shortly thereafter in the bulletin of the All India Congress Committee. This letter is perhaps one of the most unusual letters in the annals of world history. So I will describe this letter on in a subsequent video when we move to the National Salt Satyagraha Memorial. But at this juncture, what I want to describe is this site here now, the Prarthna Mandir, and essentially how we should think of it. So this march takes place over a course of, 3 weeks or more. He starts on March 12th. He arrives here at Dandi on the evening of April 5th. And on the morning of April 6th at about 6:05 a.m. he waded into this creek, which is now where the National Salt Satyagraha Memorial has been established. And he waded into that and, as it were, literally broke the salt law. All right? But let's step back for a moment to the evening of April 5th when he has arrived in Dandi, right? And what he did here at that time tells us something also about how Gandhi worked with the people of India, how he worked with the masses. All right? So here we have a lovely banyan tree. There's another banyan tree over there, even more majestic perhaps, but it's under this tree at this site that Gandhi had a little discourse. So every evening when the marchers ended the march for that evening, Gandhi would then have a discourse with the villagers. So this is what you can describe as a prayer meeting, but So they would very often also be, as in the prayer meetings that he had later on, there would sometimes be passages read from various scriptures. We have to understand that Gandhi is extraordinarily ecumenical, because in his prayer meetings, passages are read from the Gita, from the Upanishads, from the Quran. There are Christian hymns by Cardinal Newman, passages sometimes from the New Testament, right? So they could be from the world's religious texts. But here on this march, every evening, the discourse that Gandhi had with the villagers is important. Now, before the march had commenced, and during the course of the march, Gandhi had somebody who was already serving the area, right? There would be, in fact, a team of people who would effectively survey the area. They would make a determination as to what was the most pressing problem in a certain village. Right? So if in a certain village along the way, the most pressing problem was the question of the exclusion of the untouchables, or the Dalits as they are now known, or if the more pressing problem in that village was a question of the consumption of alcohol and how it was creating stress and distress in Indian families, how it was ruining families, or if the more pressing question in that village was a question of the breakdown of Hindu-Muslim unity, then depending on that subject, the discourse would largely revolve around that subject. And so this is where Gandhi delivered that discourse, right, under this banyan tree. I want to add a little small footnote which would be of interest to those who have an interest in ideas and in wordplay and in the origin of words. But the little story that I'm going to say here tells us a lot about how the origin of things and the origin of words is itself a fascinating story. So we know that in Gujarat especially, Gujarat has often been characterized as a state where the banyan reigns supreme. So the word banyan is in fact a somewhat pejorative word, although sometimes it's used somewhat neutrally. And the word banyan is someone who is basically a trader, someone who makes his living, for example, as a shopkeeper. But when we say in Hindi, for example, that a person has the mentality of a banyan, it also implies often that they are excessively concerned with such things as money, with bookkeeping, with penny pinching, someone who's perhaps a bit stingy. So how did this word banyan come about? Now Hobson-Jobson tells us, so Hobson-Jobson is a dictionary of Anglo-Indian colloquialisms. It's a marvelous work, and it was first put together in the mid-19th century, and it's simply called Hobson-Jobson, right? So Hobson-Jobson itself, the title, in fact, borrows actually from the linguistic features of Indian languages, because for those who are familiar with an Indian language, you may well know that, for example, in Hindi, there is a particular feature which we call reduplication. So, for example, in Hindi, let's say कि two friends are talking, and then one of them says, "Yaar, chai shai peete hain." Chai shai. The word shai there is actually a word that doesn't exist. That's the reduplication. It rhymes with the first word chai, which is tea, right? Ya pani shani, for example. That's what's called reduplication. And so the authors very cleverly call their book Hobson-Jobson. They use that feature of reduplication. So what do they tell us? They tell us that the origin of the word banyan is the following, that when the British came to India, and by the late 18th century, now they have dispersed through much of India, they noticed one characteristic feature of the Indian social landscape, and that was that in every village almost you would find a banyan tree. The banyan tree is a very large tree, it can get much larger than this. right? Its canopy can be enormous. And of course, the thing about the banyan tree is, in that sense, it gives hospitality and shelter to all alike, whether you are a swindler or a saint, whether you're a pauper or a prince, you can all take shelter under a banyan tree. Now the traders would come with their goods, and India has always been a hot country, right? Even before global warming set in, and under the shade of a banyan tree, it's much cooler. So they would bring their goods there, and this is where they would start exchanging goods, trading, buying, selling. And the people who were doing that began to be known to the British as banyas. The word banya here is from the word banyan, which is the name of the tree, right? And so here is a very interesting, unusual chapter in the encounter of Gandhi with the British, because nobody would think of really bringing together this part of the story into Dandi, but it is a fact that in many villages, in fact along the way, Gandhi would hold a discourse under a tree, all right? And it would often be a banyan tree, and I'm saying that there are interesting ways in thinking about Gandhi, the social landscape of Gujarat. So when we think of Gandhi, we must be thinking not simply of his battle against colonial rule and this extraordinary march, something unprecedented in world history, something that created a new template for what would become a non-violent revolution. When we're thinking of all of that, I think we should also think about the social landscape of Gujarat, of Gujarati villages, because it's not simply Dandi that we have to think about. We have to think about all the places he stopped on the way, and what exactly it is that he did, and what his relationship was with the people. And when we think of that, we also have to think of his relationship to the land. We have to think of his relationship to non-human species. And Gandhi was, at the end of the day, a person with a capacious, enormous ecological kind of sensibility, right? And it is very fitting that on the evening of April 5th, before he waded into the sea and broke the salt law, which then an act which, as I'm going to describe in the subsequent video, would reverberate around the world, right? It's very fitting that on the evening of April 5th, he should have given a discourse under this banyan tree at a place called Prarthna Mandir, right? And from here, we will then move on to the next site.